This podcast contains sensitive topics and explicit language that may not be suitable for all listeners.
Previously on The Shot.
You know, it's funny because people, even now, when we talk about Victor, people always bring up the fact, yeah, you know, I still remember Victor riding that bike down Granby Street.
And of course I told him, you know, don't do anything I wouldn't do, and kind of laughed it off and said, have a good time.
I remember there was two guys, one I'm quite sure was wearing a fur coat, the other one I can't really remember, came up and asked him something along the lines of, you got any white, or you know where I can get some white, or something like that.
I actually can remember it like it was yesterday. I can remember him saying, Daryl, have you heard the news yet? It's about Victor. I said, what about Victor? What's going on? And he said, he's been shot and killed in Virginia Beach. I was standing beside a wall at my house, and I just kind of leaned up against the wall and just kind of slid down the wall to the floor and just sat there in shock for a minute. And next thing I knew, I started to cry, and my wife came downstairs, and of course I had to explain to her what was going on.
I'm Gary Harkeye,
I'm Joanne Kimberlin. We're reporters at the Virginian-Pilot in Norfolk, Virginia.
and this is the second episode of The Shot.
So this is him as did you know him in these days?
I did, actually.
We're sitting with Victor Decker's widow, Dawn, in her apartment. She's looking at photos from before the murder.
Well, how old would you say he is there?
He's probably 20, 21 right there. Yeah. That was what he used to do on the weekends.
So how old was he again when y'all got together? He was probably...
When we started dating, he was 20.
And this is on a four-wheeler out on whose property is it?
Actually, I believe this is actually out in Gloucester, so his uncle's property.
Do you like doing this kind of thing? It
Yes.
looks like he's having a blast.
Yeah. That was
something
actually...
he did fairly regularly or well, or what?
Yes. That was actually probably our second date. I'd never been mudding a day in my life. I thought it was something that happened down in Georgia or someplace like that. Didn't know it happened here.
Happens in Gloucester, too.
I did not know that. He said, we're going to go. I'm going to take you mudding. I'm like, no, you're not. You're not going to be on the back of a four-wheeler. It's not happening. I had the time of my life.
You did,
They had to tell me to stop screaming because I was just having so much fun. I was screaming. They're like, it's late. You got to stop screaming. I'm like, I can't help it. This is awesome.
Next come the wedding photos, the baby photos. Newborn Charlotte looks like her dad. Blue eyes, blonde hair. There's a photo of Victor holding her and laughing, and one's from Charlotte's dedication ceremony before the trip to Atlanta.
So how old is she there?
She's not quite 8 months old at that point. Like maybe 7 months old.
Wow.
And
This
then
photo is 2 weeks before he died?
Mm-hmm.
The murder took its toll on the whole family. We tried to contact Decker's parents and his sister. His father has since died in a motorcycle accident. We talked to his mother once. She was polite. She said she still thinks about her son every single day. She said she'd think about being part of this podcast, but we never heard back from her or anyone else in the family. Clearly, the murder has been hard on everyone.
This is someone who I've known, literally since I was 12 years old. He was going into the military like his father. His father was Army, or he was going to become a police officer. But I feel especially, like his parents blame me for all of this. That if he wasn't with me, would he have chosen that, profession and all of that?
Decker's body was found around 7:15 this morning by a man driving north along Oceana Boulevard.
That was October 26, 2010. Decker had been partying the night before at a club called Atlantis. Matt Waters was a bouncer there.
He was one of the last few people out. I was in there helping clean up. The music was off. We heard no shot at all.
A friend was driving along Oceana Boulevard the next morning. He saw Decker's brown and white pickup and stopped. Decker was lying about 10 feet in front of his truck, face down in the mud and gravel. Blood and rainwater pooled around his body. He was a Norfolk police officer, but the call went out to Virginia Beach. It happened in their city. There's no tape of that call anymore. 911 calls are kept for only 6 months if police don't ask for an extension. No one did in Decker's case. When police turned over Decker's body, his eyes were open. There was a bullet hole in his skull near the top of his forehead. Virginia Beach police won't talk to us for this podcast, so it's impossible to know if they recognized him right away. Police are tight with each other, even in neighboring cities. But Decker was off duty and dressed in civilian clothes, and his wallet was gone. Under his shirt, hanging by a lanyard, was a silver MPD badge, covered in blood. This is Joe Barron, another one of Decker's bosses at NPD.
I was called to Chief Ron Wright's office to respond to him immediately, and I went up there, and he explained to me that Virginia Beach Police had located a body in their city. They believed that the body might be that of Victor Decker, and the chief asked me if I would be willing to go out there to identify him and see if it was in fact Victor. You know, I worked in homicide for 7.5 years, and so going to a murder scene or a shooting scene, like for myself and for a lot of officers, is just a part of the job. And you know, you're looking for evidence, you're collecting information, and but when it's somebody that you know, there's just a quiet. You know, you don't have all the chatter and talking like you do when you're at a scene. You know, of just, you know, a random person that nobody particularly knows.
That same morning, Dawn got up early in Atlanta with Charlotte. It was strange that she hadn't heard from her husband, not even a text message the night before saying he'd made it home okay. When she put her daughter down for a nap around 10 a.m., she checked the internet for news back home.
And that's when I saw that an unidentified man was found on Oceana Boulevard. And something already told me that it was Victor, but I didn't really want to believe it at that point. I just kind of told myself that I was being silly. And probably an hour later, I had fallen asleep on the couch, and my aunt came in and handed me the phone, and my mom told me that Victor had committed suicide, or that they thought Victor committed suicide.
Dawn isn't sure where that came from, if police really thought it was a suicide at first or not.
I, of course, was adamant that he wouldn't have committed suicide. That doesn't make any sense. And then I don't actually know which Norfolk police officers came to my mother's house and told her, no, it wasn't a suicide, it was a homicide.
By noon, Decker was on a table at the Norfolk Medical Examiner's office. The autopsy logged the condition of his body, the dried blood and gravel on his face, the bullet hole above his left eye near the top of his forehead. Police had bagged his hands, covered them with white paper bags to preserve any possible evidence. Like gunshot residue on his hands, there wasn't any. Decker hadn't shot himself. Or DNA under his fingernails. There wasn't any of that either. In fact, there were no signs of any struggle at all. The mud and abrasions on his face happened when he pitched forward on the road. But there were soot deposits in and around the bullet hole, and they were unmistakable signs of one thing: close contact, point blank. The barrel right up against the skull. The bullet's trajectory was downward. It shot through Decker's head and out the right side of his neck. Then it skimmed his right shoulder. The coroner found a 9mm round inside his shirt.
You know, I remember that morning when this happened, and there were a lot of conversations, quiet conversations, and a lot of phone calls going around the office.
This is Chris Amos, the Norfolk police spokesman from back then.
You know, it trickled down from like our homicide guys that went out to the scene. You know, then phone calls began from there. Again, it wasn't our case. It wasn't our scene. We weren't responsible for anything other than, you know, we just lost an officer. and we had no idea what the circumstances were. We knew he wasn't working. He wasn't on duty at the time. But beyond that, we didn't know anything. You know, they kept things pretty close to the vest.
And that's typical in a case like that, right? Because you don't want to tip your hat with facts that maybe only the killer would know.
Oh, absolutely.
Norfolk police paid to fly Dawn's mother to Atlanta to meet her and the baby and bring them home.
I kept crying. I couldn't control it. And I remember once we got on the plane, I kept blaming myself. I kept repeating over and over again, it's my fault, it's my fault. If I hadn't told him, go out and have a good time.
When they got to Norfolk, police lined the terminal. Later, Dawn really appreciated that, but at the time, none of it felt real.
I remember going there and kind of it being a lot of police officers, and I kept asking to see him, and they told me no, that I wasn't allowed to see him, and said, well, it's not real until I actually see it for myself. You can tell me that it was him, but until you show me proof, evidence that this was physically him, I'm not going to believe it, even after, having everybody tell me over and over again it was him. So they took me back to our house, and I remember turning the corner and thinking that I was going to see that truck sitting in front of the house.
Detectives had already searched the house. They left the refrigerator door wide open. They took anything that seemed like evidence.
I never was actually able to see him until the viewing. The way that they were able to get me to calm down about actually seeing him was to bring me his wedding ring.
Decker's wallet was taken by the murderer, but not his silver wedding band. His cell phone was left behind too. But his gun was gone. Decker had left his service pistol at home that night. He took a 9mm Dawn says he'd actually bought for her. He left it in his pickup when he went inside the club. When he was found, the holster on his belt was empty and snapped shut. Beach police photographed the crime scene. They pulled security video from the Navy base guard shack across the road. Traffic cameras were useless. They were a live feed, not the kind that record. Harvey Bryant was the Commonwealth's attorney in Virginia Beach at the time. In other states, his title would be district attorney.
They had the police academy people and other police officers go over that area inch by inch. Same thing back where his truck was, looking for anything, cigarette butt, something that would have some DNA on it, chewed bubble gum, gum wrapper, whatever.
None of it seemed tied to the crime, except this. In a puddle near Decker's truck, they found a 9mm shell casing. It didn't come from Decker's gun. They tested it for fingerprints, nothing. 2 days later, his wallet was found. It was on an interstate on-ramp just 1.5 miles away. I-264 runs between Virginia Beach and Norfolk. A driver spotted the wallet lying on the right side of the ramp that heads toward Norfolk, kind of like it had been tossed out the passenger window of a car. There was no cash inside. Dawn says her husband rarely carried any, and everything else was there, including his 2 credit cards. There was a Target store near the on-ramp. Police pulled video from one of its security cameras. Again, nothing useful.
You just get frustrated. It's hard to believe that once we found the wallet, there on the first entrance you can get on after going down Oceana Boulevard, that surely we were going to find more.
And the wallet itself, no fingerprints on that either.
I'm not commenting on that. If you know differently, you can comment, but I'm not commenting.
The night the wallet was found, Dawn went on TV. She looks exhausted in the video. Her eyes are red and swollen. She begs the public to call police if they know anything.
It may be nothing, but it may be something. And any little bit can truly help.
The cops just didn't have much to go on. No eyewitnesses, no forensics. Mike Mather used to work at the Virginian-Pilot, where Joanne and I work now. Then he became a TV reporter. He covered the murder of Victor Decker very closely, probably better than anyone else. Mather realized pretty quickly the police didn't have much in the way of suspects.
I'd go through search warrants, and you would find that they and requested all cell records for the nearby cell tower. And I thought right away, this is a huge fishing net they are casting. And I just imagined there would be tens of thousands of records. Every time somebody drove by that tower, it would trigger a record. So when I started doing that, I was beginning to believe that there were fewer concrete leads than maybe they were letting on, and they were really becoming a little more desperate to try to figure out what had happened that night.
While the investigation continued, it was time for a funeral. Chief Daryl Howard remembers how his department handled it.
At that time, because Victor was one of our own, we decided that we were going to have a marked unit in front of Don's house 24/7. And because I was the platoon sergeant and this was my group and Victor was my guy, I told my team, I'm taking the first shift. And that's what I did. And basically after that, I was at the family's disposal. I don't care if it was 3 o'clock in the afternoon, 3 o'clock in the morning. If they needed something, I was going to make sure they got it. I can remember talking to the traffic unit and getting our motor unit lined up for the funeral service. And, there's just something about being a part of that final ride to lay someone to rest.
On the day of Decker's funeral, law enforcement officers across Virginia covered their badges in black.
I remember getting ready and hearing my parents. I was getting ready at my parents' house. I couldn't stay in our house. I just felt like there was too much going on, and every time I'd turn the corner, I'd expect to see that god-awful truck of his sitting in front of it. But I got ready there, and all of a sudden I just heard all the motorcycles come down the street. And that's a very powerful sound.
The funeral was at a mega church in Virginia Beach. It was the first funeral Dawn had ever been to. A police bus was sent to bring family members to the church.
I remember seeing Rock Church and seeing the sea of people that were out there, just standing out there. And all of the officers saluting as we drove in. And I didn't want to get off the bus. I didn't. I was like, if I get off the bus, it's real. I remember getting down to the front, and the casket was open, and I kept looking and telling myself that this was not, it didn't look right. It wasn't him. He was too pale. He wasn't moving. And I got really upset when they closed the casket and pulled the flag over. And I don't really remember a lot of the actual funeral.
In the weeks and months after, police continued to work leads. They sent the security video from the guard shack to the FBI lab in Quantico. Even enhanced, it was too grainy and dark to see much. They tracked down dozens of people from photos taken at the club that night. 2 detectives were on the case full time.
We even wondered whether or not there was perhaps any satellite imaging going on at the time, and there wasn't.
Rumors popped up everywhere. Citizens trying to help called in tips. A lot of them didn't make any sense. One person police interviewed early on was Kendra Edwards. She works for the Virginia Beach Public Schools. She was driving to work on Oceana Boulevard just a few hours before Decker's body was found. She called the cops and told them her story.
Normally, I breeze right through the lights, and it just so happened that Harper's Road, when I came to that light, it tripped for red. And I noticed the pickup truck that was to my right, and it was a two-tone. And I really didn't think anything of it other than, my husband had one like that. And when he made the left-hand turn, it was very odd because he didn't seem to know how to drive it. And he was going very, very slow. So after that, I didn't think anything of it. And then when I got to work, it was probably about 8:45. One of the guys, came across and said, hey, they found somebody dead along Oceana Boulevard. And I, ran over there to look at the TV, and the exact same truck. It just startled me. And after that, I called because they said that, to contact detectives. And when I contacted the first one, he told me I didn't see what I saw. So after that, I kind of let it go and, talking to them, and they never got back to me, never said a word.
You drive by that spot every day?
Oh, yes, every day.
How often do you think about the murder and
A
what
lot.
you saw?
A lot. I feel bad, very bad. I mean, if he was not on duty, police officer's always on duty. It's a shame, because I know that Officer Decker's wife did not get anything, and she lost everything. It's a shame.
Normally, when a cop gets killed, the circumstances are clear. They die in shootouts or car chases, on the job. That makes their survivors entitled to state and federal benefits, as much as $400,000. But Virginia Beach police were treating Decker's death as a random robbery gone wrong. The case was far from solved, though. That left the possibility that his murder could have been related to his badge. Like maybe he saw a crime being committed and sprang into action as a cop. Or maybe it was revenge for something he'd done earlier as a police officer, like for the shootout with Marlon Sanders downtown. Sanders' accomplice was scheduled for trial the very next month.
Did he stumble upon something? Did he see something? Was this because of the case that he was getting ready to go to trial for in November? What was the reason?
First of all, it was a tremendous tragedy. We were all very shaken by the death, especially since it was a police officer. But from the beginning, it was not clear, and it's still not clear, that the person or persons who shot Officer Decker knew that he was a police officer at the time.
Remember Jamie Colston? He's the club owner you met in the last episode.
Do you remember sort of what the rumors were or what people were talking about, what might have happened to him down here?
I think the consensus from what I felt, that it was a revenge for whatever had happened in the previous shooting downtown.
But with no answers, Don's benefits were left in limbo. The Norfolk Sheriff's Office collected donations. Fundraisers cropped up all over town, raising more than $20,000. Colston held one of them at his place. When did you find out he had been shot, and kind of what was the reaction down here?
It was sad. I mean, everybody was very upset. I had, my staff was, staff just all along the street. Right away, we wanted to help. Right away, we wanted to help his wife and his daughter. My feeling was, regardless of what they find out, there's going to be a case about this, and she's not going to see a dime for a while.
Gabby White, who was friends with Decker from downtown, says that was a bad time for everyone.
Oh God, yeah. I mean, there were so many different stories floating around about what happened, or scenarios, if you will, about what happened and why it happened, and then it of course becomes like a whodunit, and everybody's looking at everybody and questioning people that they've known for years, and it definitely took a toll on us all, because none of us felt safe anymore. I mean, this is a police officer who somebody somehow got the drop on him. Like, how does that even happen? And then for there to be no witnesses, which means that whoever did this had to be watching him.
Chris Amos said the revenge theory was one of the first thoughts at NPD.
Especially with this one, it's one thing when an officer's on duty and is doing a search warrant and gets shot and killed going into a house. In a case like this, when it's away from work and it's, in another city and he's not working. He's not working on anything. And not, to our knowledge, he wasn't interacting with anyone that we would have reason to believe, would try to do him harm. He's not trying to arrest a bad guy. You just don't know. If he was targeted, was he just, a victim? Just a robbery? And he tried to, knowing Victor, he wasn't just, okay, you got me. That just wasn't his personality. So we were left speculating like everybody else as to not just who, but why.
Yeah, so Victor was not that, he would not have just, quietly been a victim, right? There would have been some kind of, he would have fought back.
Yeah, yes.
Yeah, because he had been involved just like 8 months prior or something in that shooting downtown all by himself, and that was, he was alone in the middle of all that. And
yeah, and those guys had just shot and killed another person. And certainly that, I think, initially was what everybody immediately was kind of drawn to. If it was retaliatory for whatever reason, it had to have been related to that incident. But, again, there were other theories, and probably the most popular. Again, water cooler talk around the station was that, he was just robbed, and he said, no, I don't think so.
Decker wasn't really ready to do police work that night. A toxicology report found his blood alcohol content was 0.12%. Anything higher than a 0.08% will get you a DUI. The autopsy also noted that Decker's zipper was down, but his pants were buttoned. It seems like he was planning to take a leak out by the borrow pit before leaving. But his bladder was full, more than 400 cc's of urine, according to the autopsy, so he never got the chance to relieve himself. The guard check video indicates more than 6 minutes passed between the time Decker got to his truck and the kill shot. No one knows what happened during that time. The killer might have pulled a gun and put Decker on his knees. Maybe they just came up to him as he unzipped, pressed a gun to his head, and fired. No one knows if someone was waiting specifically for Decker or if they just happened upon him. We asked Harvey Bryant how cops interpreted the way Decker was killed, if it told them anything.
What it tended to say to us at the time was that, and this is all hypothetical, we'll never know for sure, that he was presented with a weapon and was told to get down, lay down, get down on your knees, as often happens in robberies in stores as well as out there. And then they executed him. So they knew that there was not going to be any fight, put the gun right up to his head, took his wallet, and left.
So you guys, the
so,
process.
Yeah, that all of those things. Investigators spend a lot of time based on their experience saying, let's see a scenario where this could have happened. So yes, that was considered as significant. Did a trained police officer, and maybe because he'd had a little to drink, whatever, when he was told to get down like that, just voluntarily get down, thinking, all right, these punks want my wallet, they'll take it and go, and then I'll take care of them after, later on down the road.
Decker's death shoved Dawn into the spotlight. She was the widow of a decorated, fallen police officer. People knew her from TV, strangers approached her in the grocery store. And people had opinions on how she should act. They told her how long she should grieve, even what she should wear. When is it okay for the widow to start smiling again? Go out again, maybe even have a date?
So yes, you kind of get this idea that you have to be this perfect person so that, you can't do anything wrong. You can't say anything wrong. You always have to be put together. You can't have a bad day. You can't throw a fit. It can be tiring, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's not anything anybody's done. It's just this idea that I got in my head that almost this, gone with the wind kind of idea of I have to wear black for the next year.
Weirdos were drawn to the case.
There were death threats against my life and Charlotte's life. And that really put fear into me.
Do you know how those came in, or did they come into police, or what?
I don't know if they came in anonymously, but I do know that I had to have more of a kind of police presence for a while.
Dawn was even stalked.
I was with my mother and I was going to get pictures for Charlotte and noticed this guy. My mother and I stopped at the Starbucks in Lynn Haven Mall and noticed this guy was kind of keeping a distance. Didn't say anything to my mom. I didn't want to alarm her. I really kind of thought maybe I was just being a little bit paranoid. I went to one of the stores a couple of doors down. He followed me down there, proceeded to follow me back.
She called police, who came right away, but the man had vanished by then. A detective reviewed the mall security tape, and Dawn was right. The man was tailing her. Dawn never saw him again, but it was a scary incident, one of several.
I actually had someone ride his bicycle up onto my front lawn with a marked Norfolk police car sitting in front of my house. They tackled him in my front yard, and his response was he just wanted to see who lived there. So that was a little scary.
Some ugly websites even celebrated Decker's death. One called Shitty Cop wrote this: Norfolk's 2009 Pig of the Year, racist police regime terrorist Victor Decker out of there. Dead at last, dead at last. Thank God Almighty, he's dead at last. Dawn's house address, her car license plate, all turned up on TV. They showed up in the background of news spots that were filmed on her street.
I, at one point, went to my parents' house to kind of get away and maybe not be found for a little bit, just so that I could, cry or whatever I needed to do. And I guess some reporters started reaching out through my Facebook page to see if they could find out where I was, and someone gave them my parents' address. So the next thing I know, the one place that I thought I could kind of escape to, there were reporters pulling up in the front yard.
I hope that wasn't us. It wasn't us.
No.
Could have been, though.
No.
6 months after the murder, Detective John Orr was interviewed on WTKR. He supervised the Virginia Beach homicide team assigned to the case.
It's our job to try to seek out the truth and to bring to justice the person that's responsible, not only to ensure that they're punished for the crime, but to bring some closure to the family.
Orr said that a number of people had come forward either claiming responsibility or saying they had information. None of those leads panned out. He said detectives worked with other cities and agencies, which led to some spin-off charges in other states, but no breaks in the Decker case.
The family needs to know the person that's responsible is being made to pay for that.
Dawn remained hopeful. May 28, 2011 would have been Decker's 26th birthday. A remembrance vigil was held and Dawn was interviewed on TV.
Well, I know there are some people that, there's always that question of, if this is ever going to be solved. But, they've told me, this is our mission and this is what's going to happen. And so I believe it.
Virginia Beach police say they solved 4 out of 5 murders, but Decker's case dragged on. Chris Amos from Norfolk PD says his department tried to be patient.
As time passed, I'd say, hey, you guys got anything new on Victor? And, they didn't, or, it wasn't from lack of effort. We knew they were doing just the old adage, leave no stone unturned. You can only do so much, and then you come to a point where, we don't close it, but we just kind of set it aside, and we keep our eyes open and our ears open. And, I'm sure for a long time, every arrest they made, for murder or whatever, they were probably dropping the name Victor Decker in interviews.
In the meantime, the community pushed for Dawn to get those line of duty benefits. There were editorials, politicians chimed in. With the case unsolved, most people thought she deserved the benefit of the doubt, but that's not how it works. 18 months after the murder, there were still no arrests. Detectives said they interviewed more than 200 people.
I called the lead detective. I think I called him every Friday for the first 2 years. Just same response. I'm sorry to bother you, but I'm just checking in. And I got the same answer. I have nothing I can tell you at this time. Nothing I can tell you at this time.
And then in the summer of 2012,
we are staying on top of breaking news. An accused cop killer charged. Virginia Beach police say Raymond Perry murdered Norfolk police officer Victor Decker.
Dawn got a call from detectives.
I get a phone call that they have a lead and they're making an arrest. My first response was, okay, finally, something. And I kind of thought that that was going to be, in a sense, the beginning of the end of this very long, drawn-out thing.
Coming up on The Shot.
My impression now is pretty much my impression that I had from the beginning. I went to talk to the client for the very first time. I came out of that meeting utterly convinced they had the wrong guy.
The real mystery is why and under what circumstances did Officer Decker put himself in that position?
It wasn't a robber. It wasn't some fly-by-night situation. This was somebody that knew him, who was able to put him on his knees.
The Shot was produced by Randy Greenwell and edited by Bill Henry, with special help from Josh Davidsburg. Music is by Kevin MacLeod at Incompetech.com. WTKR contributed TV news clips. Will Halp is our digital graphics editor. For graphics, photos, and more, go to pilotonline.com/The Shot. Special thanks to Patrick Wilson for first suggesting this story might be worth a deep dive.
Sources for this podcast include documents and other materials found in court records or obtained by the pilot from credible sources who wish to remain anonymous.